Welcome to a deep dive. We're tackling a pretty hefty document today.
We are. It's the 2024 annual report on Form 10K for Eli Lilly and Company.
Right, the big one. This is their official rundown of, well, everything, isn't it? Business, financials, risks.
Exactly. All as of the end of 2024, looking into early 2025. It's the company's own story, in detail.
And our mission, as always, is to wade through all this for you. We're pulling out the key takeaways, the important stuff.
Giving you a shortcut, really, to understanding this major pharma player, and importantly, based only on what's inside this specific filing.
No outside commentary, just what Lilly reported.
Think of it as decoding the official narrative. This deep dive is all about this document.
Okay, let's dig in then. First off, who is Eli Lilly, based on this 10K?
Well, the report traces their history back to Colonel Eli Lilly, starting the business in Indianapolis way back in 1876, incorporated later in 1901.
And they state a purpose in the document.
They do. It's about uniting caring with discovery to create medicines that make life better. They really stress that long-term success comes from innovation, discovering, acquiring, developing, getting approvals.
Makes sense. And business-wise, how are they structured?
It's actually quite simple, according to this. A single business segment, human pharmaceutical products.
So all focus on medicines for people, no separate animal health division reporting here or anything like that?
Nope, it's all human pharma in this filing.
Got it. So speaking of those human medicines, let's talk about the big ones, the products really driving revenue. The report breaks it down by therapeutic area, right?
Yes, it highlights four main areas: cardiometabolic health, oncology, immunology, and neuroscience. That's where the blockbusters and a lot of the R&D focus seem to be.
And looking at the 2024 numbers, wow, some huge growth compared to 2023. Mounjaro has to be top of the list.
Oh, absolutely. Just phenomenal growth. Mounjaro, which is tirzepatide for type 2 diabetes, pulled in $11.54 billion in revenue in 2024.
Billion with a B. And the growth rate.
A massive 124% increase from the $5.16 billion it made in 2023. Just huge.
And how does that break down geographically?
Mostly U.S., about $8.95 billion there. The rest, $2.59 billion, came from outside the U.S.
Okay, and then there's Zepbound, same molecule, right? Tirzepatide again.
Exactly. But Zepbound is the brand name for the obesity indication in the U.S. It only launched late in 2023.
In November 2023, yeah.
Right. But in 2024, it brought in $4.93 billion. All U.S. revenue for Zepbound itself.
And the report mentions the obesity indication uses the Mounjaro name outside the U.S.
It does. And Zepbound also got approved for obstructive sleep apnea in adults with obesity during 2024, both in the U.S. and the EU. So, really fast uptake for both uses of tirzepatide.
So those two, Mounjaro and Zepbound, are just enormous growth engines right now. What about oncology? Verzenio
also showed really strong growth. It hit $5.31 billion in total revenue. That's up 37% from 2023. It's for a specific type of breast cancer, HR plus no ER, HER2.
Okay. But back in the cardiometabolic space, it wasn't all growth. Trulicity actually went down.
That's a really important point in the filing, yeah. Trulicity revenue fell to $5.25 billion in 2024.
Which is down. How much?
Down 26% from over $7 billion in 2023. It's pretty stark, especially next to Mounjaro and Zepbound's numbers.
Suggests maybe some switching or market shifts within their own portfolio?
It certainly could, yeah. Or just broader market dynamics. The report doesn't explicitly say cannibalization, but you see the numbers.
And Jardiance, that's the one they partner on, right? With Boehringer Ingelheim.
Yes. Jardiance is for type 2 diabetes, heart failure, and chronic kidney disease. Overall revenue grew 22%, reaching $3.34 billion.
But the U.S. picture is different.
It was. The report points out U.S. revenue was basically flat at $1.6 billion. Demand went up, but it seems lower realized prices offset that gain.
Interesting. And outside the U.S.?
Big jump there, up 52%. Driven by volume, but also helped by a $300 million payment related to an amendment in their collaboration deal.
Okay, moving to immunology. Taltz.
Taltz looks like a solid contributor. $3.26 billion in revenue, up 18%. That's for things like plaque psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis.
And the report lists a bunch of others too, doesn't it? Older insulins, other cancer drugs?
Yeah, Humalog, Humulin, oncology drugs like Cyramza, Erbitux, newer ones like Jaypirca, Retevmo, Ebglyss, Olumiant, Omvo in immunology, Emgality in neuroscience.
And it notes big drops for Zyprexa and Baqsimi, but there's a reason.
Right, they clarify that's mostly because they sold off the rights to those products in 2023.
And a key new approval mentioned.
Yes, Kisunla, that's Donanemab. Yeah. Approved in 2024 in the U.S. and Japan for early symptomatic Alzheimer's disease. That's a big step into a challenging area.
So a really dynamic portfolio, huge growth in some areas, shifts in others, new entries. But the future depends on R&D. What's the story there in the 10K?
Oh, it's central. The filing emphasizes R&D heavily. They had about 11,000 people working in R&D globally at the end of 2024.
11,000? Wow, and the spending reflects that.
Absolutely. They spent $10.99 billion on R&D in 2024.
Nearly $11 billion. How does that compare to prior years?
It's a significant step up. It was $9.31 billion in 2023 and $7.19 billion back in 2022. So they're clearly ramping up investment.
Where's that money going? Which areas are they focusing on internally?
The document says their main internal focus lines up with those therapeutic areas we mentioned. Immunology, metabolism, which covers diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular neuroscience, and oncology. Plus, improving existing drugs, of course.
And the report gives a sense of the drug development journey. Discovery, trials.
Yeah, it outlines the basic path. Discovery starts it, very low chance of success for any given idea. Then preclinical work, then the various phases of human clinical trials.
Phase 1, 2, 3.
Right. And finally, submitting all that data to regulators like the FDA, hoping for approval.
And they emphasize it's not easy, costly, long, lots of failures.
Exactly, which is why the pipeline is so critical. The filing mentions having approximately 55 new candidates or new indications in clinical development or under regulatory review.
55, that's a deep pipeline. Any specific highlights mentioned?
Well, they talk about tirzepatide, the Mounjaro Zepbound molecule being studied in phase 3 for other things, like cardiovascular outcomes and mortality and obesity.
Okay.
It also hit its goal in a phase 2 trial for MSH, that's a type of liver disease, in 2024.
So finding even more uses for their star molecule makes sense.
Definitely. They also mention insulin efsitora alpha. That's an investigational weekly insulin. It met its main goals in 5 phase 3 trials in 2024 for both type 1 and type 2 diabetes.
A weekly insulin could be a game changer.
It really could.
Yeah.
And they have other incretin candidates coming along too. Orforglipron?
Right, the oral one?
Yes, their oral GLP-1 candidate. It's in phase 3 for obesity, type 2 diabetes, and also obstructive sleep apnea. They started that trial in 2024.
And retatrutide.
That's the triple agonist GIP, GLP-1, and glucagon. Also moving into phase 3 in 2024 for cardiovascular and renal outcomes, plus ongoing phase 3 trials for obesity, osteoarthritis, and OSA. So, a really stacked pipeline of metabolism and obesity.
What about outside metabolism?
Well, mirikizumab, which is Omvo, got approved for Crohn's disease in the U.S. and EU in early 2025. It was already approved for ulcerative colitis, and it was submitted in Japan in 2024.
And donanemab, the Alzheimer's drug?
Kisunla, right. Approved U.S. and Japan in 2024, and they submitted it for approval in the EU and Japan, too.
So progress across multiple fronts. The report also mentions they bring in R&D through acquisitions, not just doing it all in-house.
Yes, that's clear. They expensed $3.28 billion for acquired R&D in 2024. The big one was acquiring Morphic for $2.55 billion.
What did that bring them?
A promising candidate called MORF-057 for inflammatory bowel disease.
Any other deals mentioned?
Yeah, they acquired Mablink Biosciences for an ovarian cancer candidate and exercised some opt-in rights with Beam Therapeutics for gene editing programs targeting cardiovascular diseases. It shows they're actively shopping for external innovation, too.
Okay, so massive R&D spend, big pipeline, strategic deals. Now, how does this all play out in the actual business mechanics? Sales, financials?
Well, the 10K explains their sales channels. In the U.S., it's mainly through wholesalers.
Any specific ones called out?
Yes. They name McKesson, Cencora, which used to be AmerisourceBergen, and Cardinal Health. Each accounted for a significant percentage of their total revenue in 2024.
And the top-line revenue number for 2024 again?
Total revenue reached $45.04 billion.
Which was up quite a bit from 2023.
Up 32%, yeah, from $34.12 billion the year before. Most of that, $40.75 billion, was net product revenue. The rest came from collaborations and other sources.
And where's that revenue coming from geographically?
The U.S. is dominant, $30.38 billion in 2024.
Wow, the majority.
Definitely. Europe was next at $6.92 billion. Then Japan, China, and the rest of the world combined made up the remainder.
How did that revenue growth translate to the bottom line, to net income?
Net income saw a huge jump, more than doubled actually, from $5.24 billion in 2023 up to $10.59 billion in 2024.
What drove that?
The report says it was mainly higher gross margin from the increased sales, though that was partly offset by those big increases in R&D and also marketing and administrative costs.
Which you'd expect with major product launches and growth. And earnings per share.
That followed suit. Diluted EPS went from $5.80 in 2023 to $11.71 in 2024.
And cash flow from operations looked healthy, too.
Very healthy. $12.52 billion reported for 2024.
Okay, what about the other side of the balance sheet? Debt.
Debt has definitely increased. Total debt was $33.64 billion at the end of 2024.
Up from?
Up from $25.23 billion at the end of 2023. The report details several large debt offerings they did in 2023, 2024, and even early 2025.
Any indication what that debt is funding? R&D acquisitions?
The report doesn't explicitly link each issuance, but you could infer it's likely funding a mix of things: ongoing R&D, the acquisitions we talked about, maybe building out manufacturing capacity to meet that huge demand for Mounjaro and Zepbound.
Makes sense. And for the shareholders, stock ticker LLY on the NYSE.
Right. They mention about 17,900 holders of record as of mid-February 2025. And the board approved a new share buyback program in December 2024. A big one, $15 billion.
Had they used it by year-end?
No, not yet under that specific new program as of December 31st. But they did finish up a previous $5 billion buyback program during 2024.
And dividends, are they returning cash that way too?
Yes. They paid out $5.20 per share in dividends in 2024, which was up from $4.52 in 2023. And they've already announced another increase for 2025. The quarterly dividend is going up to $1.50 a share.
Which works out to
$6 per share annually indicated. Right. So steady increases there.
Now that stock performance graph in the report, it's pretty striking.
It really is something. It compares Lilly's return against the S&P 500 and a pharma peer group over 5 years, from late 2019 to late 2024.
And the results?
If you'd invested $100 in Lilly stock at the end of 2019, it would have been worth over 626 cents by the end of 2024.
Wow. Compared to
about $197 for the S&P 500 and only $132 for the average of their listed peer group over that same time.
So massive outperformance. The market clearly likes the story.
Hugely positive reaction, yeah, reflecting that product success and the pipeline potential.
Okay, so that's the impressive growth and financial picture, but the 10K is also legally required to lay out the risks, right? The potential problems.
Absolutely. And there's an extensive section on risk factors. They make it clear future results aren't guaranteed.
What are some of the biggest risks they emphasize?
Pricing and reimbursement pressure comes up again and again. It's a major theme.
You mean pressure from governments and insurers?
Exactly. They talk about increasing government price controls globally, more scrutiny on pricing, how patients get access. It's a tough environment.
And the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA in the U.S., is mentioned specifically.
Yes, very specifically. The report notes Jardiance was one of the first 10 drugs picked for Medicare price negotiation under the IRA.
And the impact.
They expect the negotiated price, starting in 2026, to be a 66% discount off its 2023 list price for a 30-day supply. That's significant. And they expect more of their drugs will face negotiation in the future, leading to what they call accelerated revenue erosion.
And it's not just the federal government. States are involved, too.
Right. The report mentions state initiatives on price transparency, drug importation, affordability boards setting price caps, rules impacting the 340B drug discount program. It all adds complexity and pressure.
And pricing issues can lead to legal troubles too, can't they?
They certainly can. The report mentions ongoing investigations by state attorneys general and others into insulin pricing specifically. There's also litigation related to how they calculate rebates for Medicaid, Medicare, and managed care plans.
And you mentioned earlier that the auditors flagged those rebate accruals.
Yes, Ernst & Young called the Medicaid, managed care, and Medicare sales rebate accruals a critical audit matter.
Remind us what that means again.
It means it was an area the auditors found particularly challenging or complex, requiring significant judgment. Estimating those future rebates across so many contracts and rules is inherently subjective. It doesn't mean the financials are wrong, but it highlights a complex estimation area.
Got it. Okay, beyond pricing, manufacturing and supply chain risks.
Another huge area. They describe their manufacturing as complex, tightly regulated, lots of potential risks.
Like what?
Unpredictable demand swings. They specifically mentioned demand for their incretin drugs, Mounjaro and Zepbound, outstripped their production capacity in 2024. Also, risks of plant shutdowns, quality control problems, labor shortages, issues with suppliers.
They mention reliance on China-based suppliers specifically as a risk.
They do. Plus, global transportation issues, geopolitical tensions. And a key point they make is that adding or changing manufacturing capacity takes a long time and costs a lot of money. You can't just flip a switch.
Makes sense. What about cybersecurity? That's everywhere now.
It's definitely a risk they highlight. Their IT systems are vulnerable, and attacks like malware, phishing, ransomware are getting more frequent and sophisticated.
Does the risk only come from direct attacks?
No, they also point to risks from third parties. They rely on cloud providers, suppliers, distributors. An attack on one of them could impact Lilly.
What kind of impact could a successful attack have?
Disruptions to operations, manufacturing, clinical trials, potentially stealing data or trade secrets, damaging their reputation, legal issues. It's serious.
Have they experienced major issues so far?
The report says that events they've encountered to date haven't had a material impact, but they emphasize it remains a significant risk. They also mention the rise of AI could bring new cyber risks.
Do they say how they manage this risk?
Yes, they mention using industry frameworks like NIST. Their Chief Information and Digital Officer oversees cybersecurity and sits on the executive committee, and the board's audit committee has oversight responsibility.
Okay. Litigation seems almost unavoidable for big pharma.
It seems that way. The report says they're subject to substantial claims on many fronts: product safety, pricing, commercial practices, contract disputes.
Any specific examples given?
Yes, quite a few. Lawsuits related to the 340B program, those insulin pricing investigations we mentioned, a lawsuit about how they calculate average manufacturer price, and significantly, product liability lawsuits regarding incretin medicines like Mounjaro and Trulicity.
The ones linked to things like stomach paralysis.
Right, claims of various injuries. They mention a federal multi-district litigation, an MDL, was set up for those cases in late 2024 to consolidate them.
Any other litigation examples?
A DOJ subpoena from 2021 related to a manufacturing plant in Branchburg, New Jersey. A tax dispute in Puerto Rico. A breach of contract case about insulin manufacturing processes that was settled but is apparently being appealed.
And insurance doesn't cover all this potential liability?
The report notes they are largely self-insured for many of these liabilities because the insurance market is restrictive, so big payouts could hit their bottom line directly.
Shifting gears slightly, intellectual property patents. That's got to be fundamental.
Absolutely critical. Patents provide that period of exclusivity to recoup R&D investment, usually 20 years from filing.
But there are ways to extend that.
Yes, patent term extension or restoration can add time back due to regulatory review delays and patent term adjustment for USPTO delays. There are limits, but it can extend the effective life. Plus, data protection offers separate market exclusivity after approval 12 years for biologics in the U.S., for example.
But these protections are constantly under challenge.
Constantly. Generic and biosimilar companies are always trying to invalidate patents or design around them, and the report notes that delays in development or approval eat into that valuable exclusivity period.
Do they give expiry dates for key drugs?
Yes, they provide some key dates. For instance, the main compound patent for Jardiance is listed as expiring around 2029 in the US and EU, 2030 in Japan. For Mounjaro Zepbound, the compound patent runs longer, 2036 US, 2037 EU, 2040 Japan. But data exclusivity periods might end sooner in some regions, like 2027 in the US for Mounjaro. Those dates are crucial for predicting competition.
Okay, what about tax risks?
Tax laws are complex and always changing globally. They mentioned Pillar 2, the global minimum tax rules, being enacted in some places. It wasn't a material hit in 2024, but they say that could change. They also report having accrued nearly $600 million for potential interest and penalties related to uncertain tax positions.
In just general regulatory burdens beyond pricing and IP.
Yeah, there's a whole host of other rules they have to follow everywhere. How they interact with doctors, environmental regulations, workplace safety, data privacy, think HIPAA in the US or GDPR in Europe, and of course, manufacturing quality standards, CGMP.
And these rules keep changing.
That's the point they make. Evolving rules, different interpretations create uncertainty. Plus, new political leadership can mean new regulations. And there's a growing focus now on ESG, environmental, social, governance regulations too.
It's a minefield of potential issues. Let's turn inward now. What does the report say about the people running the company and the governance structure?
It talks about their human capital management, guided by core values: integrity, excellence, respect for people.
How many employees did they say they had?
Around 47,000 globally at the end of 2024. About 25,000 of those were outside the U.S. And we mentioned the 11,000 in R&D earlier.
And the focus is on creating a good work environment.
That's what they state: safe, supportive, ethical, rewarding. They mention using employee surveys and that the board oversees human capital issues.
The report names the top executives.
It does. David Ricks is CEO since 2017, with 28 years at Lilly. Lucas Montaris is CFO. He joined more recently in 2023. It also lists other key EVPs leading major functions: people, manufacturing, research, international, highlighting diverse backgrounds and often long tenures.
Their terms are up for renewal soon.
Yes. The report notes their current terms expire at the annual meeting in May 2025.
Stock-based compensation is a big part of pay in pharma, right?
Very much so. The report details how they use things like restricted stock units, RSUs, and performance-based awards for employees and management. It's meant to align interests with shareholders.
How much did that cost the company in 2024?
The reported expense was $645.6 million. So a significant factor. It's a tool for motivation and retention, tied to stock performance and other metrics.
And receiving those awards comes with strings attached, like non-competes.
Yes, the report details restrictive covenants. If you get these stock awards, you generally agree to non-compete and non-solicitation clauses for 12 months after leaving Lilly.
Regardless of why you leave.
Regardless of reason, yes. It applies worldwide if you take a job the company considers competitively sensitive.
How do they define that?
Pretty broadly. A similar role, senior management, R&D, sales management at a competitor, or basically anything where you might use Lilly's confidential information or trade secrets. These supplement standard confidentiality agreements.
And can the company take back awards if someone messes up?
Yes, there's a clawback provision mentioned. If financial results have to be restated because of misconduct by someone who got an award, Lilly can seek to recover it.
Okay. There's also something about a deferral plan for directors.
Right, for the non-employee directors. It lets them defer their compensation into cash or stock accounts. There's a change noted for 2025. New deferrals will track investment fund returns instead of earning a fixed interest rate like before. Older balances need to be moved into these funds eventually.
So just a compensation mechanism for the board.
Essentially, yes. And it's an unsecured liability for the company.
Finally, the report talks about rules for trading Lilly stock. Insider trading policies.
Standard practice for public companies, but important. They have a global procedure covering directors, officers, employees, even family members.
The basic rule.
Don't trade if you know material, non-public information. Simple, but critical.
How is material defined?
Information that could affect the stock price. Things like unreleased earnings, potential mergers, big litigation news, drug approval decisions, major cyber incidents. If it's not public knowledge, you can't trade on it.
Are there other specific trading restrictions?
Yes. Prohibitions on short-term trading, buying and selling within 6 months. No using margin accounts for Lilly stock. No pledging shares as collateral. No short selling. And restrictions on certain options trading. There are also blackout periods around earnings releases for certain insiders.
There's consequences for breaking the rules.
Severe. Legal penalties, plus company discipline, potentially including getting fired. Certain people also need to get pre-clearance before they trade.
Okay. And the report wraps up the financial section with the CEO and CFO certifications.
Correct. David Ricks and Lucas Montaris formally certified that the financial statements are accurate and their internal controls over financial reporting were effective as of year-end 2024. That's required by Sarbanes-Oxley.
And the auditors, Ernst & Young, agree.
Yes, they issued unqualified opinions, clean opinions, on both the financial statements and the effectiveness of those internal controls.
But they did include that critical audit matter about the rebates.
Right. Just to reiterate, they specifically flagged the Medicaid, managed care, and Medicare sales rebate accruals because of the significant estimation and judgment involved. It highlights a complex area, even within an overall clean audit.
So, quite a journey through this 10K. We've covered Eli Lilly's core mission, the incredible growth driven by drugs like Mounjaro and Zepbound, the massive R&D machine behind it all.
The solid financial performance, but also the rising debt, the global sales structure, and then that whole complex web of risks, pricing, manufacturing, cyber, legal battles.
Right through to the governance, the executive team, the internal policies on compensation and trading. All straight from their official filing.
And hopefully, this gives you that shortcut, that direct line into how Eli Lilly presented itself and its challenges at the end of 2024.
Absolutely. So here's a final thought to leave you with. We see this immense innovation engine at Lilly, huge R&D spending, breakthrough products changing lives, especially in areas like diabetes, obesity, potentially Alzheimer's. But we also see, detailed right here in their own report, these enormous external pressures, Governments wanting lower prices, complex global supply chains facing disruption, constant litigation threats, intricate regulations. How does a company like Lilly balance that? How does that internal drive for discovery and growth navigate or perhaps even get shaped by these powerful external forces and risks they face every day? What does this tension tell us about the future path for big pharma?